And one of the things that is unique about GRC Summit is we like to have information and questions from the audience as well. So we're going to give you an opportunity to ask Jim Quigley some questions in addition to the ones that we've prepared. So first of all, thank you for sharing some really interesting insights, and it was such a well done speech. I'm sure it's generated a lot of questions and thoughts. So as we take a, you get to choose. You are the keynote. Do you like that one? Okay, that sounds good.
And you look much better in the lights than I do.
I don't know about that, but thank you.
I think if we gave everybody a choice, I know how they would vote. I know what the bars would look like.
Well, one of my known unknowns is whether I was going to be able to make it through your introduction and find a place to breathe. So I'm glad that I pleased your late mother.
Thank you.
But one of the questions I had right off the bat is thinking about your role at Wells Fargo or at Hess. What is the process, and how difficult is it to get information from the front line to the boardroom in the context of risk?
Getting information is not hard. It's just simply getting information that you actually feel is right and actually can absorb, just because the volume can be overwhelming. In the oil and gas production company, it's much, much easier just because the business is so focused and clear, and then the culture is so strong in that regard. But I don't feel that there's a lack of information flowing up. It's just simply the challenge of being able to interpret, understand, and then provide the credible challenge to that, and to put, in a healthy way, attention into the system. And that's why what happens if you actually looked at the calories that a board member burns, and if you were to try to judge how much of that is in the boardroom, how many of those calories get burned in the boardroom versus the separate one-on-one conversations that happen and the separate trips that happen. And so just going back to where I ended on with respect to compliance risk and my relationship with Mike Romer, I think my one-on-ones with Mike probably are more important than the actual meeting of the risk compliance subcommittee. And you work in that, 60 minutes or 120 minutes, depending on the month. You work effectively and hard, and you've got lots of information. But I find the one-on-one conversation, when I just look him right in the eye and we have a real conversation, I feel that the board oversight that I'm providing then is dramatically more effective. And I'm not, dismissing the communications that flow up. Those are critical and fundamental, and what I actually also believe is the process of preparing and thinking about that information is an important part of risk oversight. But the one-on-ones I absolutely am very heavily reliant on.
You have a relatively new CRO and CAE at Wells. What traits did you and the board look for when making those hiring decisions?
We wanted someone who actually had experience in traveling the road that we were traveling, and we were confident would actually be able to bring and be a catalyst for change. We wanted a different result, and we knew we'd need to be able to do some things differently. And so we wanted agents who could help us accomplish that objective.
And was that path different than what you had done in the past when searching for those people to fill the critical roles?
I've had a lot of birthdays, but I wasn't there when we actually had earlier sought those. But I do think that this old idea of strengths can become weaknesses, because you can have lots of people who are tenured and very, very lengthy in their tenure, and you can feel good about that, and you can say that that's a strength. But you can also challenge that and say, but will that have the potential of one day being a weakness for us? And so finding a way to thread that needle and making those personnel choices is always a challenge at any enterprise, whether it's Deloitte, where I spent my adult life, or whether it's in my board oversight seats. At Merrimack Pharmaceuticals, we've been through CEO changes. At Hess, it's an 85-year-old company, and I'll challenge anyone in the room to come up with another example of an 85-year-old company that has had 2 CEOs.
Wow, That is amazing.
In 85
anyone?
years.
Anyone raise your hand if you know of one?
So we don't have a lot of practice in CEO change at Hess, but we do have a search going on at Wells right now.
At this point, I would like to bring it out to the audience and see if anyone has a question that they would like to ask Jim. This is a great opportunity. The lights are making it a little bit difficult to see, so please raise your hand high, and we have some runners who will come around. I do see your hand. Thank you so much. So if we can have someone bring in a microphone to the lady down front, and you can ask your questions.
Thanks. Jim, I think it's really interesting that you're sitting on a financial institution board, as well as chairing an oil and gas. And I've done business with oil and gas in the past, and I know how that part of the culture is they always start the meetings with a safety moment. And I've wondered, is it possible to take that into the financial industry and start every meeting with a compliance moment, some way to raise the culture? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
I want to believe the answer is yes, but I don't have any examples where I've seen that. But I would love to see compliance and risk management deeply embedded in the culture, so that, as my friend Mike Romer references, culture is all about observable behavior. And can we have that observable behavior just get deeply embedded in who we are and how we interact? And when you think about an oil and gas company, and I can take you through our assets and how many drilling rigs we have going in North Dakota right now, but it all becomes, sort of finite. Like, I can get my mind around those 6 drilling rigs that we're going to see when I'm in North Dakota on Thursday. But then when you come to a financial institution that has, millions of interactions every hour, can you get to that same position? And I want to believe the answer is yes. And I think that everyone in the financial services world wants for that to be yes. Because we do need trust and confidence in these enterprises. And not only do we need trust and confidence in the enterprises, we need these enterprises to be successful. If we want to enable our country and our citizens and our customers to be able to live that American dream, we have to have strong, vital financial systems and enterprises to make that happen. So we do need trust and confidence. And would getting that embedded as deeply as it's embedded in oil and gas help us? I would be an advocate of that.
Other questions from the audience? We have one down front. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi. I'm Michael Redmond of EFPR Group. My question is, I've been seeing a lot of standard requirements coming out. For instance, in New York State, they have the DFS requirement that the board of directors has to sign off that they have reviewed all of the risk assessment for cybersecurity, for instance, all of the risk assessments, and that they're assuring that they're compliant with the standards. So meanwhile, the boards have so many standards, so many regulations, so many everything, and they're actually requiring the boards themselves to sign off on. That's one example. Another one, of course, is coming out in California, and then there's others going out overseas where the board's required to do this. What type of training? I know that I've had, for some of our clients, we've gone in and done training for the board, a quick 2-hour meeting. This is what it says. This is what you're supposed to know. Any questions? So before they could sign off that they understood something. But we're asking boards to take more responsibility, and yet they're not giving many organizations around the world, I've noticed, are not giving them a training, because boards are supposed to know what they do. They've been out there, they've done it, but they haven't done it on that standard, on that regulation, yet they're being asked to sign and commit their signature saying, I've reviewed this, and yes, I agree. Now, granted, they can look at the internal audits and everything, but it used to be that would be the responsibility of the CEO, the CFO, not asking the boards to sign off on that responsibility. Now it's been elevated in the last few years. So what's your opinion on that? Should it have been elevated? And if so, what training should the boards have, and where do you see the future of that?
Well, first of all, the whole notion of safety and soundness requires all of the players to both A, understand their roles, and then B, be able to do them with diligence and excellence. And I am constantly an advocate of do not blur the lines. Do not blur the lines between executive management and the board, because from a safety and soundness point of view, we need executive management to have a clear role and responsibility to do that with excellence. And then separate from that role is the oversight role the board should have. And so anytime I see a regulation where we have a compound subject in a sentence and then an active verb, and the compound sentence is the board of directors and management shall, or the board of directors and management should, or the board of directors and management must, we've now blurred those lines. And what I would much prefer is that we have a paragraph that describes in a well-intentioned way, because we have well-intentioned regulators wanting for safety and soundness, but let's have a paragraph that articulates, or a sentence that articulates the expectations of executive management. And then the next paragraph articulates how we can have board oversight be effective of that management process. And that is my strong desire. I am not afraid to use the word training in the boardroom. It doesn't bother me. I don't feel it's condescending or it's suggestion I don't know something that I should know. And so we have those sessions. And when I became the audit committee chair at Wells Fargo, I insisted that we go through each of the critical accounting policies that we identified in our 10K as the significant management judgments and estimates inherent in the process of preparing financial statements. And I wanted to know, what are those items? And what is the process that leads to and enables the judgment? And then with that understanding, I can bring credible challenge and provide effective oversight.
Thank you for the question. There will be an opportunity to ask more questions of Jim, but at this point we want to invite some of your colleagues up to the stage. So our 2 chairs are going to become 4. So I'm going to stand up. We want to invite John Forlines of Fannie Mae and William Onuwa, the Royal Bank of Canada, to join us on stage to have a deeper discussion about how to build an Integris high-performing enterprise. So pay no attention to the people moving furniture behind me. And actually, Jim, I am going to take this seat if you don't mind. Okay. And just so I'm not craning my neck, I'm going to go like this. Okay. Welcome, gentlemen. Please join me in welcoming John and William to the stage.
They've heard of it.
So I'm actually going to give a little bit of intel on both of you to our audience. So John Forlines, right here, the gentleman here, is Fannie Mae's Chief Risk Officer. John is responsible for enterprise risk management, which oversees the company's governance and strategy for global risk management. His team provides independent oversight and guidance for managing risk, including the development and implementation of risk management measures across the company. So your previous roles at Fannie Mae have included Chief Audit Executive, Chief Credit Officer for Single Family, and numerous roles in customer management, servicing, and risk management for the single family business. He has a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with a concentration in accounting from UNC Chapel Hill, 10 minutes down the road from where I live, and an MBA in Human Resources Management from the University of Dallas. He resides in Washington, D.C., and enjoys traveling, playing tennis, and spending time with his wife, Janet, and their 16-year-old twin sons. Welcome to you, John.
Thank you.
William Onuwa is RBC's Chief Audit Executive. Prior to this, he was the Senior Vice President and Global Head of Wealth Management, Insurance, and RBC Georgia Risk Management Groups. William is a member of the RBC Diversity Leadership Council. Before joining RBC, he held various executive leadership positions at GE in the UK and the US. In addition, he also lived and worked in Jamaica. William is the chair of the board of Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital Foundation. He also serves as chair of the board of Yonge Street Mission in Toronto. He received the 2015 Transformation Award for Professional Excellence. William holds a doctorate degree in business administration from the University of Surrey, England, as well as other professional designations in finance and insurance management. Thank you so much for being here, folks. We can give them a round of applause, sure. So I'd like to begin the discussion with a question to all of you, and it's what is your opinion of how strongly the culture of integrity is linked to high performance across the enterprise? And because we've heard from Jim for a little while this morning, I want to start with you, John.
Sure. Good morning, and thanks for having me here today to talk about culture and integrity. So obviously, the ideal situation is a company that has high integrity and has high performance, but you certainly can see that there could be examples of a company that could have great financial performance without integrity. I think that's going to be short-lived, though. I think particularly in the financial services arena, it's going to be very short-lived with the regulatory environment that financial services is in right now. The best companies are obviously going to be companies that have a culture of integrity. It's ingrained in everything that they do. It's ingrained in just how they wake up every day and how they do everything about their business.
William, your opinion?
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I think one of the things we heard, I think Michael said it as well, is, look, the days when you look at performance or what you deliver as being the be-all and end-all, it doesn't exist anymore. I think the need to know what you need to deliver and how you deliver that is becoming the essence of organizations. There's no organization that can stand or can continue to exist by measuring just the what only. The what only is good to deliver, no one is disputing that, but how do you deliver that becomes a key essence of measuring an organization. Sustainability is all about how do you keep going, and you can't keep going just by saying every quarter I'm delivering, but behind the scenes, you're the worst a company can be, and at some point that will come out, and that's why you have board members like Jim continuously asking questions just beyond the what you have delivered.
And Jim, your thoughts?
I would just simply say that integrity builds trust, and then trust enables business, i.e. transactions and speed and efficiency, because if you lack trust, then you're going to want to have 13 other people to ask questions of and just simply try to get to the point of, do I have good information here? But integrity builds trust, which then enables business.
So I want to encourage the three of you to jump in if you feel like you want to add something of value. So even though the question might be delivered to one of you, that does not mean that they are the only person who's allowed to answer. So the next question is kind of playing on the same concept that, how have things changed relative to integrity in a high-performing business? Do you feel like it's more top of mind today, this idea of integrity in everything you do because of the business climate? Give me a comparison of what it is today versus your experience in the past. And I'll allow any of you to take the first stab at it. Go ahead, John.
I'll start. I mean, I think in with the world we live in today, with social media, 24/7, I think integrity in business is more important than ever. And I heard Jim say earlier this whole idea of observable behavior, and that's how important that is. And the reality is, in the current environment, that whether you think you're being observed or not, you are being observed all the time, and I think it becomes even more important than it has been in the past.
Right, your customers will hold you account on social media, on Twitter, if they're unhappy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and thoughts?
I think also what you see nowadays is there are only global customers. There are just no local customers anymore. So when you have global customers, standards are no longer just local standards. There's now a global standard and expectations of organizations. So you do have the shrinking of the world because of technology. You have customers who are no longer local. You have global customers. And so the standard of expectation has just gone up exponentially. It's not that integrity wasn't a point of consideration in the past. It's just now you have a world that has shrunk. You have customers that live so far off. I mean, how many people will now pick up the phone and call Amazon or order online Amazon to deliver? Whatever you're ordering may not actually have been made in the local area in which you exist. And so if Amazon doesn't deliver to you within 24 24 hours of what they promise. If you're a Prime user, it becomes an issue for you. And you go online, you can see people just telling you on Twitter how bad that service was. So what you promise is now so much more important for you to, because for you to be trusted as an organization, you have to live by the promise. You have to live by the purpose of your organization. And you can't do that by choosing when not to deliver.
There was a very large breakdown yesterday afternoon of a very popular email server, and I immediately went to Twitter and said, what's going on? And plenty of people told me that they were upset as well. So yeah, it's something you're constantly aware of. So the world has shrunk, but the data has expanded exponentially. And what role does innovation play in helping to deal with that in the risk world? What do you think, John?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that if you don't innovate, that is a big risk. Particularly today, you're going to have your lunch eaten if you're not out there innovating all the time. And I think the most important thing is most people, or I'm not going to say most people, but many people think automatically innovation and risk are just on opposite ends of the spectrum. But clearly, that's not the case. I think there are ways to innovate in risk. I think there are ways to innovate and make risk of business less risky than it is today. So I think it's very key that companies are always innovating and trying to look for new ways of doing things.
And is there a concern that you're seen as a blocker as opposed to an enabler?
Absolutely. And even some of the common risk frameworks that are out there, like the COSO framework. When they revised the framework in 2017, I believe it was, they made a big point of making sure that that part of risk is identifying opportunities, and that's more the innovation piece of it.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'll just add to that is risk management sometimes is seen from the prism of it's a no club. Risk management doesn't belong to a no club. Risk management actually helps to identify your potential pitfalls in any deal you're working on, but also, a good risk management will also tell you how to move beyond those pitfalls and how to manage those areas. No organization have a zero risk. If you have a zero risk, you can fold the company, put the money on stock exchange, but you still have risk, right? And so there isn't a risk-free organization. It's how you manage the risk to the benefit of the organization. And to the other point you were raising when it comes to innovation in the current context, see what people are talking about now. People are beginning to talk about ethical AI. It's not just AI. People are becoming more aware about the ethics of AI. How do you use data? How do you seek for permission before you use people's data? And are you using the data in the sense in which you promise the people? So talk about trust. The explosion of AI, the explosion of innovation is making people talk about ethics. And so ethical side of innovation is going to become a very dominant discussion in the very near future. And that's where risk management, compliance, or audit has to come in to help to navigate that journey where you bring in ethics into innovation.
Let's talk about this idea of creating a core competency of integrity at every level of the enterprise. How do you make that a consistent, repeatable, and reliable core competency? And I'd actually like to get your take on this, Jim, from your position on the board. How do you make that just so much a part of the culture of the enterprise with integrity at the center?
I just think that, you can, in a positive way, catch people doing something right and celebrate it, and then make it clear that that's who we are and what we value, and that's what we're going to recognize. And then when you have someone outside the lines, you have to be able to find the right way to bring them back in. I'm not an advocate of public hangings, but I am an advocate of accountability. And I think that can help to drive and then reinforce those elements of the culture. But I just think constantly being willing to talk about those things, celebrate and reward those, and then let that be defined as success is what we have to do.
I will say, in addition to celebrating those good areas, it's also understanding the distinction between someone genuinely made a mistake, and you take that mistake and use it for the organization in terms of what have we learned. It's not a witch hunt exercise, but it's really saying, from the failure that we've experienced, how do we use that to move forward, to move beyond just seeing only the failure or the people who have failed. In one of my lives at GE, there's usually a session where you actually look at where people made horrendous mistake. They invested in something that went wrong. What did you learn from it? We invested in Enron. We learned from it when Enron went down. You know, what do you look for the next time around in your asset portfolio? But also, the one thing that makes it to be part of the life of an organization is when everyone in the organization sees that people are rewarded just not for what they've delivered, but also how they've delivered it. And you could have a star who is delivering, who can make your biggest rainmaker, but at the same time, the way they do it is just not the right way. And unless you send a deliberate signal to the organization that I'm not going to take it. I mean, I know Jim says not public hanging. You don't have to hang them in the public, but you can make an announcement they found a new job, so they are no longer with the organization. But you have to be able to show and be transparent in the way you hold up integrity alongside the things you want people to deliver. So you're measured not just on the what, you're measured on the how you deliver.
The only thing I would add is the whole concept of don't shoot the messenger. I think very often when people bring up issues, then they're the one that is the one getting criticized, where they may not have had anything at all to do with the issue that's being identified. They're just the one that sees something and has the guts to raise the issue. So I think that's very important. And another thing is just to ask questions, like whenever things do go wrong, to ask lots of questions, get to the root cause analysis, learn from it, and make sure you can move on.
And of course, you celebrate, people doing things the right way. But what's the role of role modeling for those who are in charge of this sort of thing?
Well, I mean, absolutely, as Jim said earlier, that is the key. It was role modeling, and it is some of those behaviors by asking questions whenever things come up, making sure that you don't shoot the messenger whenever these issues come up, and rewarding people that raise their hands and identify issues, and make sure that when people see that, if you're very public about it, very often people will realize they're going to get rewarded for that as well.
So building a culture of integrity can obviously take a lot of time and require a focused, long view approach. How do you convince and maintain commitment from the business on the long-term value of building an Integris enterprise when sometimes business imperatives might be defined by shorter-term financial performance targets? What do you think, William?
Yeah, every quarter the analyst sits down and asks you questions, and those questions you have to be able to answer that you met the expectations or the projections that were done. I think that's the role of the analyst, to question you on it. And there are certain quarters where there has been a lot of debate. Is quarterly reporting really the good thing to be done? Because it could inhibit long-term investment, long-term view of the business, and you're working towards the quarter. But having said that, I think short-term goals has to be placed alongside the integrity with which those goals are accomplished. There's just no getting away from, we deliver this quarter, but, oh, by the way, we shortchange the consumers. Because at some point in time, it's going to come out. And when it comes out, you will have to, just imagine you having to reset your books for the last 3 quarters. I think my microphone is in and out. But,
a little bit, yes.
Yeah, so, but think about the implication for the organization when you have to revisit your last 2 quarter results because you were playing around with some numbers. And so any organization that thinks that short-term goal, meeting the short-term goals, is just about end up having a problem because at some point in time they'll have to reset the clock. And when you're resetting the clock, not only have you lost the trust, a few of your good talent may be fired because of that. And so do you really want to do that to the organization? So I will say short-term goals, yes, but short-term goals has to have the same stringent integrity attached to it.
Jim, you would concur with that, I'm assuming.
And no debate. We can have a long debate about short-termism and its impact, but to have a long term, you have to have a short term. And you just have to find a way to try to balance that equation. And I think we want high-performing enterprises, and we need to be able to reward those in the enterprise for performing at a high level. But we also then have to be effective at managing what might sometimes be crossing the line behavior, and then be able to deal with it in a very decisive way.
John, you've worked at Fannie Mae for some 30 years. You started when you were, 5? How would you describe the environment today versus how it was prior to the crisis?
Today, people are much more likely to raise their hand and identify issues early on. I think the whole financial services environment is very different than what it was before, where everything was about essentially, if it was legal, then it was probably okay to do. Today, I think people really look very clearly at well beyond not just is it legal, is it in compliance with regulatory requirements? What is the reputational risk associated with doing something, because reputational risk is more important than ever. I don't recall even hearing the term reputational risk prior to the crisis, and you hear it almost every time you go to any kind of risk management conference today. So I think that has increasingly become more important.
How do you make sure that organizations effectively manage the cost related to integrity? Because there is a cost. What do you do? William, what do you say?
I think, to John's point, there's no, we call it the newspaper test. What would you pay not to be on the front page of the newspaper? Because,
it's true.
So how do you can't measure that, because you hit the front page of Wall Street Journal or FT or the news media, there's so much run on you as an organization. So your reputation becomes, just something you can't afford to put a price on. Because I will spend anything to avoid being in front of the newspaper negatively. But at the same time, it's a journey. You can't just pump 100 million into it today and believe that that's it. Because you have to pace yourself and realize, what are the stakeholders that I'm working with? What's the court of public opinion? What will they say when this issue gets in the front page of the newspaper? What would the court of public opinion say? Because I could have the best explanation for what we've done because it's legal, because it's compliant, but in a court of public opinion, it doesn't matter how legal or how compliant it is. If the consumer feels that you've ripped them off, you've ripped them off. If the newspaper get in front of the story before you, you're dead. Mm-hmm. I mean, Panama paper came out, everybody was all busy looking at Panama papers, but at the end of the day, was there really a lot with Panama papers? Maybe not. History will judge that. But again, just imagine you being on the front of the newspaper with Panama papers. The amount of energy, the amount of calories burned, both in the boardroom, in the executive meetings, just to resolve that becomes a big issue. So I don't know whether there's a prize. All I can say to you is, if I do the newspaper test, I'll spend what it takes not to be there.
Jim, what do you think is the most compelling motivator and argument for the cost of this?
Well, I just simply turn it around on you and say, can you afford the cost of establishing integrity in your enterprise? And I just simply say, can you afford not to?
Do you want to be on the front page of the paper? Right, exactly. So actually, at this point, we wanted to open it up to the floor again to give you the opportunity to ask the questions of our esteemed panelists. So we do have our runners who are available to bring a microphone to you. So raise your hand high and we'll make sure to get the microphone to you. Oh, we've got several. And actually, we'll begin with the person over here. Coming your way. Oh, okay. And then if you can pass it to him, thank you.
Is it okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. I attended an international conference overseas this year, and we had a huge discussion about ethics. And we found that different countries had different views. And we said that that's unacceptable. We had to come down to a version of ethics. It's not based on where you live. It's not based on where you are. How do you see that happening at some point in the future? And if so, what would that look like as far as having a board, executives know that what their values are good values, and that they're not just saying, it's okay, this is what our fathers did, this is what somebody else did, this is what our neighbors are doing. It's acceptable because this is what we know from our culture. But how do you compare it to the rest of the world?
So you're asking how to have consistency globally about the view of
Yes,
ethics and integrity?
I am.
Okay.
Thank
so
you.
What has been your experience? You've all worked in a global setting.
I'll just simply say, as someone who once led a global brand at Deloitte, working across 150 countries and all of those cultural issues, what was critical to me, absolutely critical to me, was that we had the Deloitte culture, and that was, in fact, a Deloitte way of thinking about ethics and integrity. And it didn't matter whether you were in one of the Gulf states or whether you were in an Asian country or whether you were in the US of A. There was a Deloitte way, and we had a Deloitte global brand. And we also had, frankly, I came to the seat after the unthinkable Andersen implosion. But when you watch a brand as strong and as excellent as the Andersen brand, and you watch that Andersen brand become worthless, and when the Andersen brand became worthless, what happened? All of the people left. All of the clients left. And it didn't matter whether you were with Andersen in Brazil, or you were with Andersen in the UK, or you were with Andersen in China. When the brand became worthless, you were done. And so I'm not suggesting that the right answer is that the U.S. view of ethics needs to be embraced in China. I'm not that naive. I'm just simply saying, when you became a Deloitte partner, you came to the global new partners meeting of Deloitte. There were 500 of us. You got 2 hours from me on the Deloitte culture and what was important to me and why, and what it meant to me for you to be carrying a Deloitte business card, and what it meant that that card said partner, and what I expected of you, every single one of you, as you were driving our culture. But you had to be able to create that Deloitte brand, that Deloitte culture, that Deloitte view, and it had to be able to work across borders and across cultures. And you can do it, but it is not a lay-down hand.
Thank you. I was the senior manager of Deloitte, and I totally appreciate you having done that. It's very proud of your work.
Thank you.
You were nodding your head a lot, William.
I mean, I think, I'm not sure the context of the conference you're talking about, but for all global companies, at least the company I work for or have worked for, there is one culture that we follow. That culture, regardless of which corner of the earth you are, you have to follow that culture. And that culture seeks to get the higher standard of ethics in the way you operate and how you deliver on what you're expected to deliver. The image of the organization is not restricted to one local geography or geographical area. It's a global image. And that global image is furiously and passionately protected. And so we have a core set of values at RBC that every single RBC person, regardless of where you operate, and we operate in different geographical sector. You have to abide by that standard. In addition to that, you have to take the standards of the country that you abide in and make those standards, they cannot be in conflict, and they have to be part of what you live by on a daily basis.
We had another question out in the audience. Oh, great.
So my question is, what is the role of AI in the GRC world that you all foresee? The second part of the question is, how do boardrooms and the executives ensure the ethical part of that AI is taken into consideration?
This is a question about ethical AI and what is the role of AI with GRC. John, can you begin that for us?
So I certainly think that the financial services companies, certainly us, we're just starting to explore AI in particular. And I think one of the roles of risk in particular is we have to make sure we understand AI as it's being deployed. We can't use AI for making a credit decision and not have a way to explain that to a regulator or candidly to the general public where they're getting a decision on a mortgage or whatever it may be. So I think it's going to continue to evolve as AI is more used in financial services companies.
Additional thoughts from panelists on the ethical AI concept?
Yeah, a quick one on the ethical side is, as ethicists begin to converge on the use of AI within organizations, the key really is, are you making decisions that intrinsically is more in the favor of the organization than the consumer? Are you using the data not in the way it was intended, in terms of what the consumer signed in for, what the consumer will have agreed to? So the litmus test is, if the sitting with you when you're using the data, will they say yes to what you're doing?
And I guess one comment I'll add too is that AI, particularly in lending, can be problematic because of fair lending issues. And even though you may be able to use data that you might make a better decision, the reality is that you have to be careful with the fair lending rules.
Jim, any parting thoughts?
In the AI world?
Actually, we're about to wrap up, so if you have something you feel that has not been said, go right ahead.
I'm good. I'm good. I just end where I began, that this whole notion of risk management and becoming excellent at that business process is the never-ending challenge for us. And it's never-ending just because the market in which we're competing is constantly evolving. And that makes this challenge something that has to be refreshed and renewed and just thought through constantly, tirelessly.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your insights, and it was a great way to kick off the day. So please join me in thanking them for their participation this morning.
Thank you.
If you can all hold tight for a minute, I actually have a couple of closing comments.
Okay.
So we are drawing this session to a close this morning, but we do have a few housekeeping items to share with you. We are going to have a networking break now that will last until 10:40 this morning before we launch into our deep dive content sessions. There are 6 different tracks that focus in different areas. You may be aware of them, but if not, let me list them for you. They're risk, audit, compliance, IT and cybersecurity, MSIGs, and GRC technology. So information about each of these tracks can be found on the app. For those of you who have dietary restrictions, if you've already submitted them, please pick up your diet card for tonight's dinner from the registration desk after lunch. And for all of you, we really recommend that you visit the Innovation Hub and the sponsor exhibits to learn more about the latest and greatest tools and techniques in the GRC space. We also want to remind you of that Integrity Quotient survey. That was an excellent addition that they have this year, and Michael mentioned it. There are a lot of reasons why you should do it. One of them is that you actually can win some prizes, and there are fun activities throughout the day. The prize, I heard, possibly might be a drone. So we also have the social media contest that is going on. Take a selfie with a MetricStream executive. I actually already got on this last night. Post your picture with one of our leaders at MetricStream. Make sure to use the hashtag GRC Summit. And if you post it on your social media stream, it will be picked up by the folks at Metrics Stream, and there are also some possible prizes involved with that. So we want to encourage you to enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you back here in the afternoon for a lively discussion of the executives of Metrics Stream. Thanks so much.